Oda is downright obsessed with the idea of Luffy getting exactly 10 followers, and he has revealed as much in multiple sources, like interviews and the One Piece magazine. One such source is also the Vivi card databook. The Vivi cards list virtually all One Piece characters, based on the order they appeared in the manga. But there is one exception to this rule. Goldie Roger, despite being the first character ever shown in One Piece, is actually listed as number 14 in the Vivi cards. This is because cards 1 to 13 are special, and are reserved for the Straw Hat Pirates. More specifically, the first 13 cards are for Luffy, Luffy's 2 ships, and Luffy's 10 followers. Here, the number 13 card, which is both the 10th person after Luffy and the last card before Roger, is Vivi's card. While Vivi may not have officially joined the crew yet, this card is still an extremely strong indicator that she will join in the future. This is because Jinbei, who is the 9th card after Luffy, already got his special card even before he officially joined the Straw Hat crew. Another extremely strong indicator in Vivi's Vivi card that sets up her joining the crew is that her card bears the Straw Hat Jolly Roger. Of all the thousands of One Piece characters, Vivi is very literally the only one with this symbol on her card, who is currently not a member of the Straw Hat Pirates. Even characters like Momonosuke and Kinemon, who also traveled with the crew for multiple arcs and were literally invited to join, do not have this symbol. Once again, the only other example of this is Jinbei, whose card also had the Straw Hat Jolly Roger on it before he joined the crew. Essentially, the Vivi cards do not leave any real room for debate, and set Vivi up to be Luffy's final follower. The next question many of you might be thinking of is, are the Vivi cards actually a legitimate source? In short, yes, they are extremely legitimate. The cards are given the author credit of Eiichiro Oda, which is actually something that is extremely rare. Most One Piece products, such as the anime, movies and games, only get the credit as being based on Oda's work. Outside the manga, the Vivi cards are one of the very few parts of the franchise that are actually authored by Oda, along with things such as the Ace novels and Chapter 0. Furthermore, in the SBS of Volume 91 of One Piece, Oda has gone out and said that this bonus material is still a canon part of the story. If all of this wasn't convincing enough, the Vivi cards also have a history of correctly predicting the story. This is very relevant for the topic of this video, because as brought up earlier, one of the things the Vivi cards correctly predicted was Jinbei joining the crew. Now, it should be mentioned that the cards do also have a lot of errors in them, but this isn't as big of a deal as some might think. The One Piece manga itself has numerous errors, particularly when it comes to chapters published in Weekly Shonen Jump versus chapters published in actual volumes. In reality, errors are simply a natural part of writing a massive ongoing story such as One Piece. The Vivi cards are also one of the most curated parts of the franchise, as on the official One Piece website, there is a section dedicated to correcting wrong information present in the Vivi cards. What is also very noteworthy is that Vivi's card was released all the way back in 2018, yet none of the information on it has ever been corrected on this website. One last thing to bring up about why the Vivi cards are important is that it is clear that Oda himself values them a lot. In the very first Vivi card folder, there is a message from Oda, where he says that the Vivi cards are his passion project, and that it took him 10 years to finally make them happen. Another way to look at this is that Oda reserving this special place for Vivi among the other Straw Hat Pirates in the Vivi cards tells us a lot about his plans for her character. Oda also left this other message in the Vivi card folder, where he word for word says, "Like this video so that more people will realize just how obsessed I am with the Vivi cards." Still, while Vivi's Vivi card is a very big piece of evidence, some of you may still be on the fence about this idea. After all, let's say that instead of Vivi, some completely random character like Captain Morgan was given this special Vivi card instead. Even if all the points mentioned before still applied, it would still be hard to believe someone like Morgan joining the crew. Luckily for Vivi, however, the evidence for her joining the Straw Hats goes even deeper than just this card. Before I go over this evidence, however, I will first address some popular misconceptions among readers about characters joining the crew. From a bit of research I've done, fans often think that things like strength or having a distinct role on the crew are good predictors for someone joining the Straw Hats. In reality though, neither of these two things are that relevant. Strength has never actually been that much of a requirement for the crew. This is proven by characters like Usopp and Nami being significantly weaker than the Straw Hats' enemies in almost every arc since they were first recruited in the East Blue. This is also proven by Vivi herself having already traveled with the crew for several arcs, or the fact that the Straw Hats have been accompanied by literal children on some of their adventures. Basically, the Straw Hats going on their journeys with weaker characters is more so the rule than the exception. While there is an argument that now that we're in the final arcs of the story, every Straw Hat needs to be strong to be able to fight off these endgame enemies, I do not think this is really true. Even in an arc like Wano, where every Straw Hat literally had to go to war, and most of them got their own fights, Nami, Usopp and Chopper still only served as support. Here is actually a fact that might surprise many of you. The last time we had an arc where every member of the Straw Hat crew got their own one-on-one fight was in Orange Town, back when the crew only included Luffy and Zoro. In literally every arc after this one, at least one member of the crew has always had to sit out of having a one-on-one fight. This is simply how combat has always worked in One Piece, where some characters are the designated fighters, while others are mostly relegated to support. It is true that Luffy told Momo, Kinemon and Yamato that he would not accept weaklings on his crew, but there is reason to doubt this statement. After all, Luffy does actually have a very long history of literally asking weak characters to join. When it comes to Vivi in particular, we also know from the end of Alabasta that Luffy is okay with her joining, despite her not being that strong. As mentioned before, a character not having a distinct role on the ship has also never really stopped anyone from joining either. The Straw Hats' different roles are a very overstated part of the story, and many of them are already fairly made up. For example, Zoro and Usopp's roles as swordsman and sniper actually just mean that they are combatants. Specifically, using swords or fighting at range are skills that are rarely relevant to the story, and both are things that can also be done by other Straw Hats. This also goes for many of the other roles on the crew, such as Robin being the archaeologist or Brook being the musician. Just like strength is very important for some members of the crew, certain Straw Hats do have roles that are very important, but neither of these two things has ever been a requirement for joining. What has instead been by far the most consistent indicator of someone joining the crew is what your dynamic is with the Straw Hats. More specifically, future members of the Straw Hats are often given a lot of focus on their relationships with the different members of the crew before they join. Naturally, this is all done with the purpose of setting up their future dynamic with the Straw Hats. Of the thousands of One Piece characters, it is actually extremely rare for anyone to have a distinct relationship with more than one or two Straw Hats, and this is something that only really happens when we're being set up for future members of the crew. For example, Frankie before his recruitment gets to have a series of scenes with most of the Straw Hats. These aren't also just scenes to move the plot forward, but Frankie actually forms distinct bonds with the different crewmates. Meanwhile, someone like Law traveled with the Straw Hats for hundreds of chapters, yet outside him revealing his lineage to Robin, the one he only ever truly connected with was Luffy. Not every Straw Hat gets to interact that much with the crew before they join, however. For example, when Zoro was recruited, he naturally could not interact with anyone other than Luffy, because Zoro was the first Straw Hat that was ever recruited. Then there is also someone like Sanji, where most of the Straw Hats left for Arlong Park in the middle of his recruitment arc. The argument here is more so that, When the story does start giving a character a lot of moments with the Straw Hats other than Luffy, it is usually a very big indicator of them joining. Vivi is actually one of the very few characters in the story whose time interacting with the Straw Hats was used to build this kind of dynamic. Throughout the Alabasta saga, she actually shares a lot of personal moments with the different Straw Hat pirates. Even to this day, there is barely any character in the story Nami has been as close to outside the crew as she was to Vivi. This is not to say that Vivi was only focused on Luffy and Nami, as she also did have a lot of moments with the rest of the crew as well, where for example, she spent most of Drum Island with Usopp. What is also interesting to bring up about Vivi's time with the crew is that she also got to interact with Robin before she herself joined the Straw Hats. And while Vivi has not personally met Brook, she can however connect with his dream, as unlike Robin, Frankie and Jinbei, Vivi actually met Laboon all the way back during Reverse Mountain. Aside from the Vivre cards essentially spoiling Vivi's future recruitment, I think this is the biggest piece of evidence for her joining the crew. You can probably count with one hand the amount of characters whose dynamic with the Straw Hats has been given as much focus as with Vivi. And the way her part in the story was handled is a lot more similar to a future Straw Hat than it is to just a character who is their ally. Aside from everything that has already been mentioned, the next biggest piece of evidence for Vivi joining is probably just how much focus there has been for her character in the post-time skip. Let's for example look at her first real moment after the time skip, which is during Zou, where Vivi is reintroduced to the story getting ready to travel to the Reverie. This entire chapter is dedicated to the several other characters from past arcs getting ready to make this same trip, yet out of all of them, Vivi is the one given by far the most focus. This is also seen in the cover of the volume that contains this chapter, where it shows Vivi in the background of Luffy and his group. This is the same volume with things like Momo being revealed to be Oden's son, Shueisha destroying Jack, the explanation of the road poneglyphs, or the full introduction of characters like Big Mom, Raizo, Pudding, and Sanji's family. Yet out of all of these options, the cover of volume 82 decided to focus on Vivi's reintroduction to the story. This focus on Vivi continues at the Reverie itself, where she actually ends up meeting with a lot of the different characters the Straw Hats encountered after Alabasta. These include their friends from Fishman Island and Dressrosa, as well as 2 Grand Fleet captains, and even some of their enemies, like Charlos and Lucci. What is far more important about the Reverie, however, is that even though they did not meet directly, Vivi became very connected to Imu. In one of Imu's very first scenes, he is seen tearing apart pictures of Luffy, Blackbeard and Shirahoshi, yet the character whose picture Imu is seemingly the most interested in is Vivi's. While we still do not fully know why Imu is so interested in her, this does put a lot of onus for Vivi's importance in the Final Saga, where Imu possibly considers her just as, if not more important, than characters like the user of the Nika fruit or an ancient weapon. We do later find out a bit more about Imu's obsession, where Vivi is revealed to be a descendant of Nefertari Lily, the queen of Alabasta 800 years ago. Lily does not only resemble Vivi, but is also someone Imu still pines for centuries later. Perhaps even more importantly, however, we also discover that Vivi, just like Luffy, is a member of the D clan. Vivi's family carrying the Will of D is also apparently such a big deal that Imu immediately decided to kill Cobra after finding this out. Imu also orders a manhunt after Vivi herself, turning her into a fugitive from the government. This all makes Vivi a very unique character in the Final Saga. Imu killing her father makes Vivi one of the very few characters with a personal reason to hate him. Imu himself, despite being one of the biggest villains in the story, is actually someone who has barely had any interactions with the rest of the One Piece cast, due to Imu hiding himself from the world. After the Reverie, Vivi is currently on the run from the government, and she is at the moment under the protection of Big News Morgans of all characters, adding yet another major character she has become connected to in the post-time skip. What is very noteworthy here is that Vivi currently has her own subplot in the story away from the Straw Hats. This is something that is once again very rare. The One Piece story is mostly focused on the Straw Hats, and things happening in the island where they are at the moment. When we do get a subplot where we pan outside the Straw Hats, it is normally only ever something given to the most important characters, such as the Revolutionary Army, the Blackbeard Pirates, or the world government. These kinds of subplots have also often resulted in very big developments for the One Piece story. The pre-timeskip storyline about Ace hunting down Blackbeard resulted in the Summit War, while us following the revolutionaries in the post-timeskip has already led to things such as Kuma being freed, Sabo seeing Imu, and the destruction of Lulusia. The fact that Vivi is getting her own subplot where we've now regularly been following her could speak a lot about how important she now is in the story. What should also be mentioned is that a lot of the characters from the Alabasta saga who know Vivi, like Crocodile, Dory, Brogy, Bubble, and the Baroque Works agents, have also conveniently returned to the story and have become major players in the Final Saga. While this could be just a coincidence, it could also be something the story is deliberately doing for Vivi's character. The Straw Hats are essentially the main characters of One Piece, and even before they join the crew, we often get this kind of setup for their future storylines. With Robin, we already discovered things like her ability to read the poneglyphs, or her having been hunted down by the government since she was a child, already during Alabasta, both of which were used to set up her future storylines with the crew. One final thing I would like to bring up in this video is that the manga does genuinely seem to be moving towards Vivi being reunited with Luffy and the Straw Hats. This was something already set up at the beginning of Egghead, where the Straw Hats hear the news that Vivi has gone missing. The reason why the crew did not go after her was because they decided that Vivi has her own adventure, and that just like with Ace, they should trust her, and only come help her if she is in mortal danger. It should be mentioned that the Straw Hats at this point in time did not know that the world government was literally hunting her down. This, however, did not close the book on Vivi reuniting with the crew. At the beginning of Elbaf, we see that Vivi is literally trying to contact the Straw Hats to help her through the newspaper. If Luffy eventually sees this message, he will very likely try to get to Vivi and help her, as this is something he's done every other time his friends have asked him for help. If Vivi reunites with the crew, it is actually very hard to see her not becoming a full-blown Straw Hat. Because Imu is trying to hunt her down, there is really no safer place for her in the world than with the crew. Joining the crew would also perfectly align with what she would want to do at this point. Vivi's biggest priority is still to help Alabasta and her people. If the world government is potentially going to sink the world, the Straw Hats are once again Vivi's best bet at saving her country. In essence, this would make Vivi's dream very similar to Jinbei's dream, where she would see Luffy as the man who can save her people. If Vivi discovers the truth about her lineage, and that she carries the will of D, she would very likely want to learn the true history by going to Laugh Tale. Basically, this video had three main arguments for why Vivi is the most likely character to be the final Straw Hat. One is that she is pretty much literally listed as Luffy's 10th follower in the Oda-authored Vivre cards. Two is that she has an established dynamic with several members of the crew, which has so far been the strongest indicator of a character joining the crew in the manga. And three is simply that she is one of the side characters given the most focus in the post-time skip, and that we are seemingly moving in a direction of her reuniting with the Straw Hats in the near future. Now, despite all this, I could still be wrong. For the sake of fairness, I've made a similar video to this, about why Yamato could join the crew, which you can watch by clicking here. As always, thanks a lot for watching this video to the end.